I canceled my mother-in-law's birthday dinner after they excluded me. Vengeance was sweet. For months, I organized my mother-in-law's week-long celebrations in Rome. Every detail, every reservation, every flower, every dish, everything passed through my hands. It was the kind of event any family would consider memorable. Until I realized that, despite having done everything, there was no place for me at the table. The pain of exclusion was deep, but what I did with it completely changed my life. It wasn't just about a dinner. It was about boundaries, respect, and the power to say enough is enough. Today I look back with pride, not regret. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment from which city you're watching. I want to know how far my voice has reached. Rome always had a strange effect on me. As if the city watched me in silence, testing my courage at every step. The restaurant was stunning. Ancient columns, amber lights, and a view of the Colosseum that looked hand-painted. I had taken care of every detail of Eleanor's celebration as if she were my own mother, even knowing I would never be treated as a daughter. I wore a custom-made dress, mid-heels, and my favorite necklace. I felt a quiet pride and a pang of childish hope that perhaps I might finally be included. Marco, the maitre d', greeted me with a restrained smile and eyes that said more than his mouth. He led me through the dining room with the impeccable professionalism of someone who understands the importance of silences. The tables were set with surgical precision. The gold of the cutlery reflected the candlelight. My eyes scanned the arrangements I had approved myself, the colors chosen to please Eleanor, the perfection of that night. I wanted to believe that was enough to erase years of cold stares. But then, I saw the waiter discreetly lean towards Eleanor and whisper something in her ear. She didn't smile, nor did she show surprise. She merely nodded her chin, as cold as marble. That minimal gesture disconcerted me. I tried to dismiss the thought, convincing myself it was just last-minute logistics. Still, the discomfort settled in me like an invisible thorn. It wasn't the first time I felt something was being decided out of my sight. Even as the event organizer, it was as if I was always on the sidelines. As guests arrived, I greeted everyone with elegance and courtesy. I maintained my role perfectly, smiling, adjusting details, subtly complimenting others' attire. It was what they expected of me. Efficiency with a veneer of sweetness. But inside, a subtle anxiety grew. This night would be different. I knew it, I felt it. But I still didn't understand how. The waiter quickly moved away after the whisper, and Eleanor merely nodded in silence. The dining room filled with the muffled sound of conversations and toasts. Everyone was being led to the main table. I walked towards it with controlled steps, feeling the weight of expectations on my shoulders. My eyes scanned the designated places. There were 12 perfectly aligned chairs. 12. But there were 13 of us. The error was glaring, especially for someone like me, who never missed a detail. My first reaction was rational. I counted again, looked at the names, searched for any sign of an extra chair. Nothing. I turned to Sean, seeking answers, and he just gave a cynical chuckle before saying, "Oops, I guess we miscounted." As if it were an innocent stumble. As if it wasn't an explicit message. Melissa let out a muffled laugh. Thomas raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. I remained standing, motionless. No one moved. No attempt to offer a seat, to mitigate the oversight. The silence that followed was crueler than any words. I stood there, exposed, as if I had interrupted a play and the actors didn't know how to improvise. My eyes sought each person's one by one, until they fixed on Sean, waiting for something that didn't come. A gesture. Regret. A silent apology. Nothing. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm. A part of me screamed, another just observed. I already knew what to do. Wounded pride didn't want vengeance yet. It wanted dignity. I stared at Sean as if searching deep in his eyes for any trace of regret. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just raised my head, straightened my shoulders, and smiled. "It seems I'm not part of the family after all," I said, my voice firm and sweet. The silence was absolute. No one contested. No one tried to stop me. I turned elegantly and walked towards the exit as if I were closing a show, not being expelled from it. Each step was a breaking point. The sound of my heels against the marble was the only one that accompanied me. I descended the stairs, feeling the Roman night envelop me. I was alone but not defeated. The humiliation burned like fire under my skin, but above it, something new was born. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew it wouldn't break me. Not like that. I took a deep breath and slowly crossed the street, towards the cafe on the other side. The city pulsed around me like a living organism, indifferent to my pain, and curiously that gave me peace. Alone I crossed the dark street, feeling the sound of my steps echo among Rome's ancient stones. I found a corner table in an almost empty cafe, from where I could still see the restaurant across the street. I ordered an espresso and opened my laptop with methodical movements, as if I were in the office and not at the epicenter of my emotional collapse. That pain needed direction, and nothing gave me more control than spreadsheets. I connected to the network, typed the password, and accessed the Caldwell's reservation system. My face was serene but my hands were cold. With a few clicks, I accessed the week's payment panel. There were all the services I had contracted: private dinners, personalized tours, yacht rental, executive transfer, villa stays. I had made every reservation, personally negotiated with every supplier. And now all of it was within my reach, a click away. That week of luxury was the stage I had set, and I could dismantle it. My breathing stabilized. I paused to observe the restaurant again. Inside, glasses still clinked. They continued dinner as if I had never existed. I had served them perfectly. Now I would serve silence. I started calling one by one in fluent Italian. Please cancel. The event has been prematurely ended. The villa owners regretted it, the drivers questioned. But everyone obeyed. And all confirmations came back to me. With each cancellation, I felt a layer of pain wash away from my skin. It was as if, by dismantling their luxuries, I also cleansed myself of shame. All refunds, by contract, would be credited back to the contractor's account, mine. There was something deeply symbolic in taking back what I had planned with such care. As if I were tearing off an expensive mask and seeing the naked truth of what that family was. I confirmed that all refunds would fall into my account in the coming days. I closed my laptop calmly and ordered another espresso. I leaned back in the chair and, for the first time that night, allowed myself to feel something close to relief. The chaos hadn't started yet, but it was about to, and I would be the only person prepared to watch. The logic that guided me was cold, but it kept me on my feet. Control returned to my hands, and with it my identity. Across the street, I saw Melissa abruptly leave the restaurant, looking around as if searching for explanations in the Roman air. Her hurried steps, her irritated gestures. Something had already changed. Perhaps someone had tried to confirm the transfer for the next day. Perhaps the yacht was no longer available. That was just the beginning. And I didn't intend to stop. I saw Melissa leaving the restaurant nervously, her heels echoing like a prelude to what was yet to come. Whenever I revisit memories of my youth, I feel a mix of warmth in my chest and a chill down my spine. I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, the daughter of a seamstress and a mechanic, surrounded by honesty and hard work. I started working early, helping with church parties and community events. Gradually, I discovered a natural talent for organization, aesthetics, and improvisation. My first big victory was organizing a wedding for 200 people on a tight budget. And still, it was unforgettable. It was years of hard work, sleepless nights, and much discipline. Every satisfied client was another step up towards something bigger. When I founded Elite Affairs, renting a tiny room in Back Bay, I already knew what I wanted: to offer luxury experiences with surgical precision. It didn't take long for my name to circulate among the most demanding political events, brand launches, business dinners. Everything passed through my hands. It was at one of these events, a charity gala in New York, that I first saw him. Sean Caldwell was next to his father, elegant, confident, exuding privilege with every gesture. As I checked the schedule on my phone, I looked up and met his gaze. A firm, interested look that seemed to pierce my professional armor. He approached shortly after, saying he had never seen such impeccable organization. He smiled, and I for a moment allowed myself to feel special. It was in that crowded hall that I first saw Sean, and my story began to change. Sean was the kind of man who seemed to have stepped out of an expensive novel, cultured, seductive, with refined taste and a disconcerting self-assurance. The beginning was overwhelming. Short trips to Venice, flowers sent with handwritten notes, dinners on rooftops under artificial stars. Everything seemed taken from a carefully written script to charm me. And I, somewhere between skeptical and enchanted, slowly gave in. Our relationship progressed with surprising speed. In less than a year, we exchanged vows in an intimate ceremony in Florence, just for close friends. I insisted on discretion, he on elegance. It was a beautiful day, yes, but different from what I imagined when I was a girl. There was something cold in his family's eyes, but I convinced myself that time would soften it. That love and effort would be enough to make me belong. At the reception, between toasts and photo poses, I noticed Eleanor. Elegant as an ancient statue, she watched me from afar with a look that never smiled. In a quick moment, when someone complimented my organizational skills, she murmured, "Certainly, she must be very practical, coming from where she came." She disguised it with a sip of wine, as if it were a neutral comment. But the phrase pierced me like a thin spear, polished but sharp. That was the first time I felt Eleanor's elegant disdain, hidden under false civility. In the following months, I immersed myself in attempts to please the Caldwell family. Thoughtful gifts, planned dinners, childhood memories carefully listened to and transformed into personalized surprises. I thought that love and dedication would be enough to be accepted. But every gesture was met with politeness, never with affection. As if I were a good acquisition, but never one of us. With each encounter, the feeling of inadequacy grew, silent and corrosive. Sean, though kind at first, began to absent himself from family gatherings. He said he preferred to avoid embarrassment, that his mother was difficult anyway, that it wasn't worth trying so hard. But I persisted. I wanted to be part of it, even if it cost me a little of myself. Sometimes I found myself smiling while my heart shrunk. The feeling of always being in the wrong place, even when I was in the right place, was suffocating. During a summer brunch at the family's country house, I noticed Thomas whispering with Melissa, laughing discreetly. I passed close enough to hear a loose phrase in the air. "She still thinks Boston counts as pedigree." Frozen, I turned slowly, but they had already changed the subject. I pretended not to hear. I pretended it didn't hurt. But there, something inside me irrevocably broke. It was at that instant that I heard Thomas laugh about my origins, and I understood that I would never be welcome. The months that followed were marked by strange silences and prolonged absences. Sean traveled more frequently, saying he needed to deal with company matters, but left traces of inattention. Messages became shorter, compliments rare. And then one night, he left his phone unlocked on the table. It wasn't intentional, just carelessness. A photo notification caught my attention. I hesitated. Then I opened it. There were messages exchanged with a certain V. Affectionate dialogues, followed by agreed times, secret dinners, boutique hotels. What hit me most, however, weren't the words. It was the image. A clear frontal photo of a pregnancy test. Along with it, the phrase, "Our miracle is growing." My fingers trembled. The betrayal had a body, a form, a future. And yet, I remained motionless, staring at the screen until it went dark on its own. That night I didn't cry. The pain was too sharp for tears. I just closed the phone, got up and went to my office. I sat in front of the computer, opened a notepad and began to record everything. I needed to transform chaos into evidence. It was the only way to maintain sanity. At the bottom of the gallery I found the image of the pregnancy test with the name Vanessa Hughes. In the following days, with silent steps, I began to look for more. There were signs everywhere, but I ignored them. An envelope forgotten among financial papers revealed something even worse. A draft pre-divorce agreement, with detailed clauses and divided values. Further back, bank statements from tax havens, all in Sean's name and a shell company. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was protecting himself from me. In the upper corner of the last page, something was highlighted in red pen. Eleanor dinner 6:30 p.m. The same date. The same place. All connected. The planned exclusion, the scripted divorce, the hidden funds. I felt as if I were reading a theater script in which I was the disposable character. But it wasn't fiction. It was my life carefully dismantled while I smiled and served champagne glasses. The dinner was highlighted as a turning point. The trap was real. I gathered everything carefully, organized the files into digital folders, printed copies, and stored them in sealed envelopes. I didn't know yet what I would do with all that, But I knew it wasn't time to confront. This needed strategy. Time. I needed to compose myself. To plan as I always did. I wouldn't act in the heat of pain. I would act with precision, with coldness like them. I took an old briefcase and hid the documents among fabrics. I wrote down passwords, discreetly shared keys with my lawyer. With each step, my anger transformed into determination. I could lose a marriage, but not my intelligence. Not my freedom. And ironically, I was the one who organized that whole trip. Every hotel, every dinner, every detail. They just walked the stage I set. And it was only then that I realized. I had built every detail of the theater where they planned to erase me. I was in one of the hotel corridors waiting for a taxi, when Eleanor's voice cut through the thin wall of a half-open door. She spoke softly, like someone who commands the world without needing to shout. My name wasn't mentioned, but the content was crystal clear. There will be 12 seats, not 13. Yes, only 12. Is that understood? My heart froze. It was the proof I didn't want to find, but needed to hear. It wasn't carelessness. It was an ambush. My hand slowly slid into my pocket, where my phone vibrated silently. I activated the voice recording with a discreet touch, keeping my breathing under control. It was surreal to hear that from the woman who feigned politeness in front of others, while coldly orchestrating my exclusion with mathematical precision. That recording was more than just audio. It was confirmation of cruelty disguised as etiquette, an open wound wrapped in French perfume. I stood there motionless, as she ended the call with an impeccable grazie mille. I left without a sound, like someone carrying an explosive secret in her coat pocket. There was no more room for illusions. Eleanor didn't see me as part of the family. She saw me as a threat. And now, ironically, it was she who was giving me the weapons. The pain mixed with a strange lucidity. I would no longer be a background character in that theater. I immediately saved the audio. The first brick in rebuilding my strength. In the past, I would have confronted her on the spot. Shouted, cried, demanded respect. But not now. I learned from them that the most effective battles are silent. There was no rush. It was necessary to observe, plan, anticipate every step. I returned to the room, sat in the velvet armchair, and took a deep breath before listening to the audio again. Every word was a precise stab. And now valuable evidence. I updated my lawyer in Boston by email. I attached the file, described the context, and asked for guidance with professional coldness. He responded in minutes, recommending caution and preservation of evidence. That would raise any judge's eyebrows. The exclusion was deliberate, documented, and added to the betrayals and hidden accounts. It began to paint a much more serious picture than a simple divorce. The pain of betrayal still burned, but now it was fuel. I was alone, yes, but armed. I would no longer have to beg for respect. I was taking the reins of a story that, until then, I had written with others' hands. For the first time, I saw the situation with total clarity. And with that clarity came something even more powerful: strategy. I forwarded the audio and the rest of the evidence with the coldness of someone who refuses to be a victim again. In the following days, I mentally reorganized every piece on the chessboard. I knew the travel itinerary better than anyone. I knew where it hurt most. Public image, financial reputation, logistical comfort. The counterattack would not be noisy, but surgically precise. I listed all program services, and one by one drew up dismantling plans. They didn't know yet, but every step they would take from then on would be along a path I had chosen. With each new insight, a layer of my self-esteem returned to its place. It was no longer just about revenge. It was about freedom, about not accepting less. What they did to me at that table was not a mistake. It was a symbolic act, and I needed to reciprocate in kind, but not as they expected. Without shouts. Without tears, just irrefutable actions. I began to rehearse my next moves like someone preparing a play. Every detail, every possible reaction, every consequence. For the first time in days, I looked in the mirror and saw something I thought was lost. My strength. It was there, waiting for me to summon it. I smiled faintly. The expression was restrained but true. Suffering refined me, and now it was a weapon. I smiled in front of the mirror for the first time in many days. I was the one controlling the scene. The sunset painted the rooftops of Rome gold when the Caldwells arrived at the restaurant. Flashes fired, Local reporters tried to capture favorable angles. It was the beginning of Eleanor's gala night. And everything was exactly as I had planned. Outside, the lined black cars created the image of power that family so cherished. The laughter, the greetings, the rehearsed gestures. Everyone played their roles perfectly. They were at the peak of the performance, oblivious to the fact that the backstage was already crumbling. I saw Sean get out of the car smiling, waving to the photographers. And then, as if nothing else mattered, he turned to the side and kissed Vanessa. Quick, discreet but unquestionable. She was there, in a red dress with a slightly bulging belly. There was nothing left to hide. Or perhaps he never tried. The image was etched in my mind like a final movie scene. There was the truth exposed before the lenses, while I watched from afar, invisible, yet present in every detail of that night. The world could see them as an elegant clan. But inside they were fragile. And that fragility would be exposed not by scandal but by absence. A subtle, symbolic, and definitive absence. Sean's kiss to Vanessa sealed a public betrayal. And the ruin began there under lights and cameras. Dinner began promptly. The maitre d', with his usual politeness, led the guests to the central table of the dining room. Linen tablecloths, impeccable crystal, floral arrangements in shades of white and gold. A setting worthy of a magazine cover. But just like in the previous rehearsal, there was a glaring detail. One less chair. The guests exchanged glances trying to hide their surprise. Marco, impassive, simply watched. Melissa cast an uneasy glance. Richard tried to hide the tension by adjusting his cutlery. Eleanor, for her part, seemed absolutely serene, as if the absence was a natural part of the order. But there, in that small void between the chairs, discomfort grew like a cloying perfume. The perfection of the setting began to crack at the edges. The silence spoke more than 1,000 words. As the waiter served the first wine, Marco fixed his eyes on Eleanor, then on Sean. His eyebrows arched discreetly as if to say, "Something is out of place." And it was. The absence was not of a chair. It was of conscience, of respect, of limits. The atmosphere grew denser, heavier. And I outside saw everything like someone watching a puppet show. Marco, in the background, observed everything with the uneasiness of someone who feels the gears failing. With a rehearsed movement, Sean picked up his glass and raised it, as if nothing was happening. "They must have miscounted," he said, with rehearsed naturalness and a cynical smile. Melissa let out a nervous chuckle. Thomas fiddled with his phone. Eleanor tasted the appetizer as if the world was in perfect order. But something no longer fit. Sean's phrase, repeated as a joke, now sounded empty. The error they planned became a real inconvenience. Marco then took a subtle step aside. He approached the assistant maitre d', murmured something. Then his eyes swept the room until they found a fixed point. The point where I was, discreet on the sidelines but more present than ever. He walked slowly towards me, respectfully. It was as if he felt something bigger was coming. And that I was the silent epicenter of it all. With each step he took, my heart beat more firmly. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. Certainty that the fall would be slow, elegant, and inevitable. They had designed the stage. I would just adjust the lights. Marco approached me with a look that understood more than words ever could say. I met Marco backstage at the restaurant, amidst the comings and goings of waiters and the muffled sound of ambient music. His eyes met mine with a contained gravity, like someone carrying news that cannot be ignored. "Anna, we need to talk. The Caldwell's payments have been cancelled. One of the suppliers called me a little while ago, and others have already started to question." I merely nodded, as if I had expected it. There was something comforting in knowing I wasn't alone at that moment. Marco had always been professional, but now there was complicity in his posture, a kind of silent respect. He leaned slightly, speaking softly so as not to attract attention. "The team wants to know how to proceed. What do you wish me to do?" His trust gave me strength. There, in the midst of the approaching chaos, he stood by my side. The dining room was prepared. Dishes were being finalized, and outside, the impeccable facade of the Caldwell family still resisted. But backstage, everything began to crumble. I took a deep breath before answering. My voice came out firm. "Nothing will be delivered without upfront payment. Not dessert. Not the next wine. They want exclusivity, so they'll have it. but only if they pay for it. Marco smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. He nodded and simply said, "I'll let the team know." With quick steps, he disappeared down the restaurant corridors, leaving behind a trail of expectation. The sound of the kitchen continued, but it seemed more tense. The gear that kept the Caldwells on top began to jam, and now there was no way to hide it. Marco moved away discreetly, and the countdown had begun. A few minutes later, I noticed a change in the air. The team's movement became coordinated, but less fluid. Exchanged glances, hushed whispers, and the feeling that something was about to spiral out of control. I walked to one of the discreet doors and observed, unseen, the main dining room. Marco had returned now directly to the central table. His posture was impeccable, and his expression unwavering. He approached Sean and Richard, bowing politely. "Gentlemen, forgive the interruption, but we need to resolve an outstanding issue before proceeding with the services." The two looked at him in surprise, trying to maintain their composure. Richard tried to downplay it. "It must be a banking error." But Marco was not intimidated. "The cancellation was made directly from the family's account. We need a new payment now, or services will be interrupted." The embarrassment was immediate. Some guests began to disguise their discomfort by adjusting cutlery, whispering, or looking at their own plates. Eleanor remained static, like a porcelain sculpture. Sean, meanwhile, sought a diplomatic way out. "Perhaps it was a system failure, we'll resolve it." But Marco did not move. His eyes were firm, his voice polite but unyielding. The dining room transformed into a display of thinly disguised tension. Melissa looked around as if searching for culprits. Thomas seemed disconnected, distracted by his phone. Marco just waited. And then, with a slow movement, Eleanor stood up. Her chair scraped sharply against the marble floor. Her eyes were fixed on Sean, as if everything finally made sense. Eleanor rose from the table, pale, as if she were the first to see the fall approaching. Tension mounted with each passing second. Richard cleared his throat nervously, trying to contain the embarrassment that grew like a wine stain on white linen. "Surely, Marco, we can resolve this later," he said, attempting to whisper. But his voice came out louder than intended. Marco maintained his tone. "Unfortunately, Mr. Caldwell, we have clear instructions. Without payment, services cease immediately." It was the opposite of the elegance they tried to maintain, the naked truth in a crowded room. Silence hung heavy. Then Melissa exploded. "This is all Anna's fault," she screamed, pointing with a trembling finger. "She set this up. Of course it was her." The words cut through the air like glass. Some guests subtly recoiled, others began to whisper. The accusation came without proof. Just desperation. And in that moment I realized they were desperate because they had lost control. Finally, my hands were cold, but my face remained serene. I walked into the dining room, ignoring the glances that turned to me. Each step was an affirmation of strength. My eyes swept the table, meeting each familiar face. When I reached the center, I placed my bag on the side table and took out a black envelope. "Don't worry, I brought something to contribute to the celebration," I announced. Everyone fell silent. "Here are copies of fraudulent contracts, bank statements, and message exchanges that prove infidelity, money laundering, and tax evasion." The air seemed to leave the room. I handed the envelope to the lawyer who was waiting beside me. A discreet man, but with a firm presence. Eleanor took a step back, almost imperceptibly. Richard stared fixedly at the table. Sean still kept his eyes on my face, but without the courage to say anything. I placed the envelope in the lawyer's hands, and reality struck like lightning at the heart of the party. There were no shouts, no confrontations. The silence was now absolute, not out of respect but out of fear. Melissa was pale. Thomas avoided looking at me, and Sean just breathed heavily, as if he finally felt the weight of his own name. I continued. "For years you humiliated me with politeness, scorned me with smiles, excluded me with sweet words. But I was watching, recording, planning. My eyes met Eleanor's. And today I return everything. Not as you expected, but in the most elegant way I know, with evidence and in public." The room seemed smaller. The people around became extras in an inevitable scene. The image of the perfect family shattered before the flashes of cell phones. Some recorded everything. Others simply watched shocked. You wanted a memorable dinner. You got it. I said this with a faint, true smile. One of the guests let out a loud sigh. The waiters in the background stopped moving. Time seemed suspended, as if the universe watched that fall with reverence. And I stood whole with a clean soul and a firm heart. There was no more fear. There was liberation. I walked out without looking back. As I passed through the main hall, a group of tourists waited to enter the restaurant. One of them, knowing nothing, applauded, believing he had witnessed a theatrical scene. Others followed suit, smiling, not understanding. And there, between the end and the beginning, I left behind everything that hurt me, with my head held high, my shoulders firm, and my dignity intact. I left to applause from a group of tourists, and I had never been so sure of who I was. I went up the hotel stairs feeling my feet finally touch the ground, as if the weight of the previous night had given way to a strange lightness. The hallway was silent and the room just as I left it, tidy, impersonal, temporary. I calmly opened my suitcase, carefully folded my clothes, and put the documents in a leather folder. Each closed zipper seemed to close a cycle. There was no rush. It was the end of something, and the beginning of everything. As I fitted the last pairs of shoes, my phone vibrated on the table. The screen displayed the name I most feared and least respected, Sean. Can we talk? Just the two of us. For a moment I hesitated. The old reflex to respond, to listen, to try to understand. But I took a deep breath and just locked the screen. There was no longer the two of us. There was him with his wreckage and me whole. I closed my suitcase, looked around, and left the room without regrets. The reception was empty, and the driver was already waiting outside. I got into the car, and as we drove through the city, I observed Rome with different eyes. It was no longer the setting of my suffering. It was the place where I awakened, where I stopped trying to fit in, where I learned that dignity is not negotiable. And it was with it that I was returning. The car had barely left the hotel when a new message from Sean appeared. Please hear me one last time. On the plane I settled into the window seat and even before takeoff, took my laptop out of my bag. I needed to review everything calmly, clearly, and with detachment. The documents, the screenshots, the audio files. I opened the folders, reorganized files, marked important points for the lawyer. It no longer hurt as before. Now it was like managing a project. And I was excellent at that. With headphones on, I listened to Eleanor's audio again. This time without anger. Just with the coldness of someone who recognizes a pattern. Then I reread the contracts, the statements, the messages. All there, detailed, incontestable, devastating. I updated my lawyer with the latest information and scheduled a meeting for the next day. When I closed my laptop, I felt something new, relief. As the aircraft cut through the clouds, I opened the passport application and began the name update request. It was time to release the last link. The Caldwell surname never truly belonged to me. It was a false armor I wore trying to protect something that didn't exist. By deleting that name, I wasn't erasing the past. I was simply freeing myself from it. A silent rebirth at 36,000 feet. I confirmed the name change request and for the first time in a long time, felt proud to say, I am Anna Morgan. When the plane landed in Boston, the cold wind cut through the Roman warmth I still carried in my body. Upon exiting the arrival gate, I was greeted with smiles, teary eyes, and a bouquet of flowers that almost didn't fit in my arms. My team was there. Not out of obligation but out of affection. They knew. They followed from a distance. And now they welcomed me with the delicacy I had never known in the family I tried to win over. Sincere hugs, soft words, respect in their eyes. No invasive questions, just the right presence. We got into the company car together, laughing about small details of the trip, avoiding the big ones. When we arrived at the office, my room was clean, quiet, fragrant. On the desk, in addition to hot coffee, there was a pile of invitations for events, collaborations, and interviews. I smiled. I was back. Not just to the city or to work, but to myself. And this new version was stronger, more precise, and lighter. I sat at the desk, closed my eyes for a second, and thanked silently. Everything they tried to take from me, voice, place, worth, I regained alone. With strategy, with dignity, with self-love. Among the invitations on the table, one stood out. Anna Morgan, confirmed as Honoree of the Year. The following days were a whirlwind. The financial press exploded with headlines. Caldwell under investigation for tax evasion. Luxury crumbles at Rome birthday dinner. $1 million event ends in public denunciation. I read each article with a strange serenity. Justice didn't need my shouts. It took shape in the silence of the facts. They were finally exposed. Gossip magazines talked about Betrayal, the pregnant mistress, the scandal in the Italian capital. But what surprised me most was the economic newspaper's article. Anna Morgan, the entrepreneur who faced a dynasty. Seeing my name associated with courage, not exclusion, was more than justice, it was poetry. And in the midst of it all, a new attempt at contact, Sean. He left a voicemail laden with hesitation. Anna, you may not believe it, but I'm sorry. Can we talk? I deleted it without listening to the end. The same pattern. Manipulation disguised as regret. It wasn't remorse. It was fear. He didn't want to hear me. He wanted to win me back to keep his image intact. But I was no longer the woman who sought to be heard. I was the one who chose who deserved to listen. Sean tried to reach me for the 4th time. And for the 4th time found silence as an answer. Then, something even more unexpected happened. I received a handwritten letter on letterhead, sent by Eleanor. Anna, I believe we had a difficult start. I would like to propose a reunion. A fresh start. I read each word carefully, like someone analyzing a play. She used words like clarification, civility, and family. Ironic. Now that everything had crumbled, she sought reconstruction. Not for me. For appearances. There was no bitterness in my heart, only lucidity. She would never admit guilt. Eleanor didn't work that way. But her gesture, or rather, her attempt at control disguised as conciliation, no longer affected me. I decided to respond. With elegance. I arranged the meeting at a public cafe. In the city center with a defined time and place. No secrecy. No secrets. I dictated the terms now. I chose a table in plain sight of everyone. I arrived early. I ordered a cappuccino and waited. When she came in, I maintained a polite smile and listened to every phrase, every justification, every attempt to rewrite the narrative. In the end, I simply thanked her, said there was no resentment, but also no return. I stood up, paid the bill, and left the empty cup on the table. That wasn't reconciliation. It was closure. I scheduled the meeting in a public place. Not to reconcile, but to elegantly close what was never genuine. That night, I went to a small restaurant near the Charles River. I ordered a glass of wine and a light dish. Alone. Without hurry. Without emptiness. I silently celebrated what I had achieved. When the waiter brought the bill, I toasted myself and whispered, "To the missing chair." And I realized it wasn't missing. It protected me from a place where I should never have tried to fit in. The sunset painted the sky with golden and lilac hues. I picked up my bag, left the tip in folded notes, and walked along the sidewalks of Boston. The wind touched my face like a warning. Everything passed. Everything taught. And everything now made sense. There was no drama at the end. Only beauty in what is reborn. And I was reborn whole even after they tried to break me. Life moved on. And so did I. Without haste, without noise, but with a glow that not even the silence of the rejected can extinguish. I was my own home. My own name. My own family. And everything that came after Rome would be a choice, not a consequence. I walked towards the light of dusk. And for the first time I felt that the world was finally mine. Now, I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you experienced something similar? Support the channel. Subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you'll also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.